Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Happiness Hour for Leaders. Today, I have with me a guest who has done some very interesting work other than just being an entrepreneur. And it is actually that adventure of his which triggered me to say, hey, I got to know more about him than one normally does. We see people through a limited lens, and I think it was the layers that I wanted to go through. Uh, Cornelius, Conlon thank you for being here and agreeing to be a part of our podcast series. Con is an entrepreneur with a strong track record of founding, scaling, and exiting technology businesses across EU and India. He's the founder and director of the Merit Data and Technology, a leading provider of data origination, transformation, and AI solutions. He's also on the board of various organizations, gallery, museum. He contributes in a fairly extensive, wide way. Originally from Ireland, he holds a qualification in commercial computer programming from Dublin and has lived and worked in India, in Chennai, for 20 years. Now, what makes him even more interesting is that he recently completed the Marathon des Sables race, MDS, in Morocco, which is recognized as one of the most difficult foot race on earth, covering a massive 270 kilometers over 7 days. So just reading about it gives me the goosebumps, and I don't know how you did it, but we'll come to that as we go through
Sure.
our conversation. So welcome, Con.
Thank you, Ashu. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the generous introduction. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here among some very illustrious guests. So thank you again for having me on board.
Let's dive into what you really, I think, epitomize is taking leaps of faith and just getting started. And you started out as an entrepreneur in technology over 30 years ago when, we did not really talk too much about technology. How did you choose this path of tech entrepreneurship in those days?
Yeah, I think I come from the west of Ireland, a very agricultural community, actually, a sort of very small town called Ballinamore in the west of Ireland, and it was a very tech-free zone as well. But I had a couple of friends who had the old Commodore 64 computers and the ZX Spectrum, very early stage home computers. And so that sparked a little bit of an interest. I did a school science project with a school friend. And I think we came fourth out of something like 800 participants in a science expo in Dublin. So that kind of kept my interest going. And yeah, I'd mentioned I was fairly young when I did my 12 standard or leaving certificate, as we called it in Ireland, and straight up to Dublin and managed to get into Dublin Institute of Technology, which was a pretty good technical school, and did the computer programming there. So yeah, it stemmed really from school experience, I guess, and then later jumping into it as a two-year course, and then for a year of work after that. I'd also had a kind of keen interest in politics
Okay.
and economics, and was fairly politically active as a student. So I went on to study economics and politics at University College Dublin as full-time degree. But of course, the humanities, 15 hours lectures in a week, plenty of time for mischief and plenty of time for other stuff. And so, yeah, myself and a friend, Leo Moore, started a software business. I think I was a second year student, and it was a payroll software, very conventional accounting and payroll systems. But it was interesting in that it gave me that kind of taste of entrepreneurialism. I think I've described it as a kind of mini real life MBA because at the age of 20, probably 22, 23, we had a dozen employees, we had nearly 1,000 customers, recurring revenue clients, and a couple of investors, and so we were dealing with shareholder agreements and articles of association and all that sort of stuff at quite a young age. So and that went well, yeah. So a little bit of luck and just a bit of freewheeling attitude, I suppose, got me
And a,
started.
and a lot of grit.
Yeah, a lot of grit. I mean, it's definitely part of the entrepreneurial journey, isn't it? Is grit and staying power. It's pretty essential. That's a tricky one too, because sometimes you're in a business that you bash away at it for 3 years, 5 years, 6, 7 years, and sometimes you have to kind of recognize when you're beaten,
Hmm.
and not to burn another 5 years on a dead horse. And how do you balance that against the need for tenacity? So sometimes that's quite a tricky judgment. And I think one of the skills I've tried to develop is my judgment around situations and people. But you definitely need grit, for sure. It's just how long you kind of run with that, and don't get sucked into a situation where you burn 10 or 12 years on an idea that's never got the traction. But yeah, and then you do need luck. I know lots of entrepreneurs who are very, very talented and very committed, but they just didn't get any breaks. And so, yeah, there was definitely a bit of luck on the journey for sure.
What you call luck, I would call a combination of awareness or judgment, as you said it, and tenacity. You've been a serial entrepreneur, founding, scaling, exiting. What have been some of the challenges in terms of exiting? Because this is what leaders find the hardest, is exiting a business when it's the right time.
Yeah, I think yeah, sometimes leaders obviously get very wedded to their businesses and the whole kind of emotional journey of blood, sweat, and tears going into building a business and nurturing it and kind of getting over the hurdles and the obstacles and the challenges. And when it comes to exiting, there's a few factors. I mean, it depends on your own mindset. Are you ready to exit the business and take on new challenges in life, which perhaps was in my case. Other people just love what they do and they kind of want to build that business through their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they want to pass it on to their kids and all of that. And so they'll shy away from an exit. But I think for a lot of us, and certainly if you've got investors on board, you
Hmm.
kind of have a duty to them. You can't take their money and then hunker down for 25 years. I mean, that's a bit unfair. So you've got to think about, if you've taken on investor money, you have a duty to exit those investors in a good way. And so I was always very conscious of that, and I was very lucky with my investors at Merit, which was my third business and probably most successful. I had 12, 13 angel investors. And it was great because they're all ex-business people, and even when things were going terribly wrong, as they do in every startup, and you miss every KPI known to man, but they had a really supportive attitude, and they would ring me up and say, just keep going. You've got some positives there. Stay with it. So it's lovely to have an investor set like that had that maturity and had that kind of, and we're not panicking that they're going to lose their 100 grand or lose their shirts. And part of that was also by design, Ashu. When I was raising money for the startup, I was very clear with my investors that it's a startup. 8 out of 10 startups fail. You need to be able to lose this money without changing your lifestyle or without it. And so I did lose a few investors with that message, but the ones that I had were really quite solid and quite supportive.
Hmm.
Um, but you do have a duty to exit them. And then to back your question, just being realistic about valuations. For example, you might love your business, you might have put your heart and soul into it, but really the market's going to give you two, three, four, 5 times revenue, or let's say 10 times profit or 15 times profit. You might, if you're in a very sexy business that's growing, you might increase those multiples, but you've got to be realistic about valuations as well. So I think it's a balancing act, but there are definitely some factors to think about in the exit picture.
Yeah, but so fundamentally, I think what's really coming through is not getting attached and looking at it objectively time and again.
Especially if you have investors, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I think so. I mean, otherwise people build passionate businesses. Let's say if you're in a craft, like let's say you're building a leather business, or a fashion brand, and you have that passion and you want to carry it through for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. You want to hand it on to your children. That's perfectly legitimate, I think, and fine. But I think if you've got investors, you do have to factor that in,
Mm.
and be, as you say, be kind of realistic about the valuations.
Moving on to this, like you said, new challenges. You enjoy new challenges, leaving the investors aside. You enjoy the fact that there's a new challenge always. And coming to Chennai, doing the Marathon des Sables, you literally walk into unknown terrains. What gives you that tenacity or to just take this leap?
Yeah, I think I've always been a little bit um, gamey and up for something a little bit different from that young age when I started that first business. And I guess in a way it does go back to childhood and I had very supportive parents. They were not at all academic and so even applying for universities and doing those application forms and essays, they weren't really equipped to kind of help at that level. So you're kind of on your own at one sense. And I was the youngest of seven kids. But there was a lot of love there and a lot of stability, which counterintuitively perhaps gave me maybe more license or freedom to go and explore because there was that very solid foundation and base back
Mhm.
home. So maybe in a weird way, uh, the mundanity and the stability of it actually gave me a sort of license to try new things. So when we sold the payroll business, well, a guy I knew brought me over to London and I jumped straight over. He was planning to IPO his business. It was a HR software business. And so that was exciting again, just a new scenario. Dublin, I'd spent 8 or 9 years in Dublin, which is a great city, but London is a different order. So I thought, yeah, let's go and have a look. Let's be brave and get stuck in. So and then I think I was only probably 9 months there when Frank gave me a call to say, listen, we're doing lots of foreign versions of this software. We're doing French, German, New Zealand, South Africa. We need more capacity. We need to do an India thing. We need to open an operation in India. And can you go? Um, so Frank called me on a Tuesday, office in the west of England, and he said, Con, can you do this India thing? We need to get it started. The rotation's only around the corner. I said, India, wait. Okay, Frank, I'll do it. Then he said, can you go on Saturday?
Oh,
So I said,
wow.
I said, it's a bit keen, Frank. It's a bit tight. And he said, yeah, we'll get you a visa on Friday. Come on up to do a same day visa. So went up to London, got a visa on Friday, went for a few drinks with some Irish lads. Got a bit too drunk, but managed to make the lunchtime flight out of Heathrow the next day. But so I was totally unequipped. I hadn't done any cultural acclimatization. I didn't even time to buy that Lonely Planet guidebook. Actually, you're old enough to remember
Yep. Yes, I am.
the Lonely Planet guidebooks. Didn't have time to buy it. So I was landed in Chennai, which 25 years ago was kind of quite a lot more difficult than it is now. Just you know, assault on the senses, really. Sounds, racket, honking, the traffic, smells. Sort of city was infrastructure wasn't great back then. So, but I do remember thinking to myself as I drove in from the airport that yeah, it's deeply different here. I should forget everything I know. Don't bring any baggage, from
Wow.
Ireland, from England, because clearly this is a different. Um, and I had to get an office together. Frank had hired a new IT park called Title Park in Chennai. We were one of the first tenants, but I had to go and get builders and electricians and cabling guys and all that stuff. So my Tamil is still, was non-existent. So it was tricky, but I think I kind of enjoyed it. I guess keep your sense of humor, try not to get too frustrated when people don't make time commitments and stuff like that. Um, and quickly learn probably when somebody says yes, you probe that yes a lot. You've got to really kind of ask 5 or 6 follow-up questions,
To
or
know if
people,
it's a yes or a no.
yeah, or deadline. They say they're coming on
Yeah.
Tuesday, and you're don't have you anything else going on Tuesday, or what are you doing? And plan B, you get good at building plan B. So, yeah, so I jumped in, and so I think, and then like for the marathon with Sables again, it had been playing on my mind, and it was a big challenge because it is one of the toughest races on earth, and so yeah, but I think I've always had that sort of ability to try things. Some fail, some don't go well, but mostly I've been lucky that I've been able to manage through quite interesting situations, and um that guess after coming to Chennai, we did float a business, and I helped out on the flotation. That went well. But it was a classic .com boom and bust, so it was great fun. It was great fun for sure.
Curious, open-minded, fearless, adventurous, with a sense of humor. I mean, that is quite a package to be when you are getting into a place like a Chennai, right? Overnight or jumping in for the marathon. I saw those videos. How did you keep was it your sense of humor, or what was it that carried you through that entire?
Yeah,
It's daunting. Forget about mind blowing. It's daunting.
it is. It's a tough race, and for listeners, just a little bit of context. It's a race in the Sahara Desert, right in the southern tip of Morocco. And the thing about it is, it's kind of six marathons equivalent back to back. Um, and it's in very difficult terrain. So running in sand. If you run 100 meters on the road, if you're running 100 meters in sand, it'll take three times the effort. Sand is really the enemy. Um, so, and then on top of that, it's a self-supporting marathon. You bring everything you need on your back. It's in a backpack. So they don't give you food. They don't give you sleeping bag. They just give you a very basic tent. They supply water, and that's it. You're on your own. And so everything you eat, you bring. If you want a spare pair of shorts, you bring. If you want to have a compass, you bring it. So, I mean, say a kilo is on your back, running in the heat, cold at night, and it's marathon after marathon. So it is quite difficult. And I was a bit unlucky. I was quite sick in Tangiers. So when I got to the start line, Ashu, I was kind of behind the curve because I was meant to slightly fatten up in the 2 weeks running up to the race, but I was quite sick. I got sick in Madrid with a fever and then food poisoning in Tangier. So I was already struggling a little bit. So the first 3 days were definitely very, very difficult. And day two, yeah, I remember at the end of a 40-kilometer run, just being utterly exhausted, um, and you really have to dig deep. Day four was 100 kilometers in one shot. So 100 kilometers is quite a run. That's like 19 hours.
Wow,
Yeah, with
that's
the
intense.
backpack.
That's two marathons and more, and
Mhm.
in the desert.
Yeah, and also a lot of running at night, which is a bit more treacherous. You've got a little head torch
Mm.
on, and so every step is kind of slightly. If you step in boulders or potholes, or you step up on a twig, you get thorns up. So it's that was also a very difficult day. I remember at 70 kilometers, really struggling to get to the next water checkpoint, and but I think a couple of things, moments like that, you do have to dig deep, and you do have to kind of steel yourself and look for kind of inspiration, or try and find some positive attributes. So, for instance, at 70-kilometer mark, they gave us a bowl of soup, which is the only time they gave anything other than water. And your whole system would cling to that, right? That's a life raft mentally. Oh, I've had a bowl of soup now. I can definitely do another 10 kilometers. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense actually in some ways, but it's kind of instructive of the human mentality. I think for entrepreneurs as well, right? Entrepreneurs going through a tough time, sales aren't coming in, or you've lost a couple of key clients. Good entrepreneurs will find some positive life raft to kind of focus on, galvanize their team around. Um, you know, at least we're okay for cash. At least we're not carrying a lot of debt. We can go back to our shareholders, maybe some of that. You find something to cling on to, right? And the same on the marathon. The super kind of life raft, a mental life raft, and then you also think about. I think a lot about people in history, really, who've gone through a lot worse. You think the great explorers in our time, the Christopher Columbus, and then other politically charged figures, but from a sheer chutzpah and sort of adventurism, or Da Gama or Shackleton in the Antarctica, or George Mallory climbing Everest in 1920, 1921, no oxygen. So you think about people like that, I've always found quite inspiring, and knowing that they endured worse. So yeah, I think some of that really helped get me through those tough moments.
So it's a really endurance game of constantly tapping into yourself to stay on the course despite all challenges.
Mm.
How do you really build that endurance in yourself? Is there some practice you follow, or like you did talk about, of course, reading a lot of inspiring stories?
Yeah, I think that definitely was a factor for me, and for anybody listening with kids, if you can encourage your kids to read biographies, it certainly worked for me as an inspiration. It could be about musicians as well as or artists as well as
Mm-hmm.
explorers, but I definitely found that, and then building that endurance. I think the other thing actually was like my training for marathon to Sable was pretty rigorous. I mean, it was 90 kilometers every week, 15 kilometers a day, dump, dump, dump. And if the weekend, Saturdays, I actually do 35 kilometers. And I think it's the mental strength when you wake up on a Saturday morning, you've had a few drinks the night before, your left leg's a bit, that calf muscle is giving you trouble, and it's teeming rain outside as monsoon has hit. And so part of you wants to just say, oh, I'll go tomorrow, or I'll skip today. But you want your strong mind to say, no, hang on, out of bed, let's go. You know, don't be pussy about this. Let's, pull yourself together, get the shoes on, let's get out there. What I call your kind of your strong mind. And so I was pretty diligent in the training and stealing myself. Also, I'd made a commitment to myself not to complain about anything for the 9 months before the marathon. Anything. If the food in the restaurant is horrible, if the croissant is stale, if the driver is taking 4 wrong turns, if, whatever it is, just don't complain. And begin to try and steel yourself for, um, things that go wrong and be adaptable. That was another big part of it. So I think you looked at it, you definitely want to assert your mental strength when in the dark moments when you're kind of struggling with something, but also in the prep and in the training that you've got the mentality not to stay in bed or not to take a shortcut, not to. And again, if you go back to the entrepreneurial journey, if you're kind of fine tune your sales team, send them on training courses if they need a training course in enterprise selling, you've got to get them to go through that, or don't take shortcuts because it will bite you later on. And so the reason I was able to get through the desert was I had probably run 5,000 kilometers, 34,000 kilometers in the preparation part. So, and sometimes it's spiritual too, Ashu. If let's say you're injured and the mental's not a strong mental attitude is not going to fix a bad knee quickly, you can pray. You can dip into the spiritual realm. Um, so I did that for sure a couple of times. Usually, whatever God is good, whatever God you're appealing to, usually they do look kindly on an earnest request. And so, yeah, I think those things, certainly mental attitude, but doing the work in the lead up in any endeavor, you got to do the work. And then spiritual if you need it. And planning, obviously, breaking down that into its component parts, right? It's the toughest race in the world. You have to be realistic. If I was a couch potato, I'd never have been able for it. So you have to be realistic about your goal. But I was already doing half marathons and marathons, so it was realistic. And then you break it down into its parts, right? How will I deal with the heat? I'll
Hmm.
just practice in Chennai, right? How will I deal with the distance? Well, I'll do a marathon, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, I'll try and do 60 kilometers, 70 kilometers. How will I deal with the weight? Well, I'll start with a 3 kg backpack, and then I'll work my way up to 4 kg, 5 kg, 6 kg. But break down your problem into its parts, tackle each one, do the work, get your mental position right, and the spiritual if you need it. So yeah.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. But really, where this takes me to is, you talked about mindset and the spiritual realm that we tap into when you really. Happiness too is a mindset. It's not something that is external, it's something that is internal. And yet, all of us run externally to seek that happiness rather than recognizing that it's a mindset we need to build. It's about, like you said, stop complaining, really anchoring into the internal and then using that spiritual realm. What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, I think that's exploring some interesting terrain. I think you're right. I think happiness or validation from an external source is rarely a good option. You can't control how other people will react to you or what they say to you or how they. So yeah, I think you've got to kind of look inside and decide to be content. And I'm a big fan of contentment, really. I think it's undervalued. Just be content with what you've achieved and try and be positive about what you've done yourself and draw your own kind of satisfaction about the positive elements that you've achieved in your life. Could be go back to how you performed in school or a piece of artwork or a piece of music you play well, um, because I think yes, it's internal and how you look or how some people kind of get focused on that, right? But I think you've got to keep coming back to your own internal clock, um, and and it's a much better position to operate from. Trying to operate for external factors to make you happy, I don't think tends to end well. Just really look at your own self and the positive aspects of your own. Um, I mean, I'm Catholic, so we do a good line in guilt, and we can get all sorts of, if you focus on some of that stuff, you could turn into quite a. But I think mastering the positives that you have and harnessing but like I said earlier on about the bowl of soup, kind of, um, it's important, right? You need those life rafts, you need those things to cling on to, and it's fine to cling on to them to get you through, right? So, yeah, I definitely, and for me, exercise and any mental health, if you're going through a tough time, any mental health professional will tell you that exercise, if you can add that into your day, is always a really good tonic. And for me, I think I like running because it's just so simple. Just need a pair of trainers and a pair of shorts, and off you go. And yeah, the streets are a bit crap. Like running on the streets of Chennai in my training, there's rickshaws and there's dogs and there's cattle and we still have the whole thing. I know it's very stereotypical, but Greenways Road in Chennai is full of obstacles and human, animal, and other. So it's not ideal, but it's okay. It's good enough, right? It's fine. Let's not. And if it's too hot, if it's too wet. I mean, it's okay. A bit of rain is not going to kill you. If it's hot, just bring more water. Um, get a hat, buy a hat. So
It's a lot of mental training, a constant attitude of it's okay, let's get on,
yeah,
let's move forward. It's about really moving
yeah.
forward.
Let's crack on. Yeah, let's
Yeah,
move forward. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
There's just excuses. I mean, you're looking for the difference actually between reasons and excuses. And I think successful managers and successful entrepreneurs, they hit an obstacle and they just crack on. They
yeah.
just keep going. They go around that obstacle, they go under it, they'll blow it up, they'll find some way to overcome. Whereas I think lesser mortals will have it as an excuse, right? Um, didn't succeed because X, Y, Z. And I think and sometimes it's fine if you've really tried hard to overcome something, you can demonstrate that, then it's fine. But I think too many people sit down in front of the obstacles too quickly, Um, and so, yeah, I think that attitude to crack on is really important. Um, you know, Trump imposes tariffs. We got a 25% tariff or 50% tariff. Okay, what do we do? How do we solve this? Where do we go? Where are we going to get new customers? Should we have anticipated this? Should we really have been dining off these five customers in one country for so long, or should we really have had the initiative before it came down? But if it's here, you're in the here and now. You're dealing with it. Okay, what are we going to do? It's a factor. It's an obstacle. How else are we going to solve this issue? And I know that's easy to say in some ways, but I think you just got to take your big problem and break it down into its parts, like I did with the marathon and all the factors: heat, weight, distance, terrain. Break it down into its parts and then execute on them. So yeah, I think that positive mental attitude is pretty important.
I think you've really kind of said it very succinctly in this last bit about when I was going to ask you one advice for the aspiring entrepreneurs who are dealing with so many challenges today, AI, technological advancements, the war, the uncertainty in the markets. But ultimately, it's really about going around looking for the solution, breaking it down, and just crack on it.
Yeah, yeah, and to try and do so with a semblance of calm and a semblance of you know leadership kind of depends on you demonstrating a certain poise. No, it's not. The early days, I'm guilty of blowing my top or losing your temper, and sometimes in early stage startups, maybe that's necessary. That passion and that kind of aggression almost is perhaps not a bad thing sometimes, but certainly as things mature, you want to see your leader taking on those challenges and those obstacles with an air of poise and calm indeed in the face of the adversity, but still focused. You can still be assertive, you can still be driven, you can still have urgency, you can still have all those factors. But it's even better as an entrepreneur if you can kind of hold your nerve for your team around you and kind of galvanize people that we could solve this without getting
Okay.
too bad tempered about it and sort of animated about it. Yeah.
There's a lot that's got covered, and I'm going to ask one surprise question. Uh, one habit or attribute of yourselves which is negative or pulls you down, and that you have to keep working on because you clearly have cracked the code on so many others. I need to know the human part of you. You can't make me feel so miserable.
No, I think certainly when I was younger, I was quite impetuous, I suppose, and I could be bad tempered. I mean, I think if you speak to my team who were with me back in the early days of Merit, they will recall times where I was like I mean, Irish can be a bit like the Punjabis, but our range of bad language is quite impressive. So I think we have something in common with our Punjabi cousins. And so I was definitely a bit of a sort of firebox, firecracker, certainly when I was younger for sure, but I think it maybe matured a little bit. But that was definitely a fault line that I had to kind of sort out. Um, and yeah, there was definitely that. Sometimes, wanting to be liked also can be a good thing in some ways, it's likable, but also it can be a bad thing in that it may deter you from actually being more assertive or stronger when you need to be. Um, Maybe not as confident as I should have been in some parts of my career as well. So yeah, definitely lots of fault lines that I've had to kind of work through, as we all do. But yeah, I'd say they were mastering sort of your temper and sort of language and all that my early days, and later on, just maybe being a little bit more assertive when I need to be. It's probably another thing I've had to work on. Um, but yeah, I'm sure if you were speaking to my team, that have a long list, Ashu.
I think
Thankfully, they're not here.
we'll leave it at that, considering I know your wife as well. So I think I shall completely keep it quiet there.
She could bore you for hours with my faults, I'm sure.
Oh, well, no, this has been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all the very best for your next adventure, whatever it's going to be?
Thank you very much, Ashu. Nothing on the radar at the moment. I'm going to keep my head down and give my legs a rest for the moment. But yeah, no, it's been a very interesting, some really interesting questions there to ponder. So I've definitely enjoyed the talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Ashu. Thank you.